public's attention.
It was her 14-year-old phase. Everybody goes through that, the kind of bratty teenage thing. Maybe she went through it about 5 years after everybody else because she'd been in a very kind of controlled environment. And you know, like, if your whole image is of being the girl next door, you must be dying to do something a bit raunchier. So she ends up going out with Michael Hutchence.
Without a doubt, whoever's in control of Kylie herself, her assistants, would have exploited that moment to turn her into a much more grown-up figure, if you like.
And the whole good girl turn bad thing is something that's worked in pop music for time immemorial and always will. And Kylie is one of the few people who's managed to do it on a cyclical basis. She's gone good girl then bad girl then good girl and bad girl, and the public keep lapping it up and forgetting that she's done the same stunt a million times.
Michael Hutchence taught Kylie how to play the fame game and reminded her that she should be in control of her own image. With this in mind, and free from the restrictions that had governed her relationship with Jason, Kylie delighted in being candid with the press about her sex, drugs and rock and roll lifestyle.
She slipped up a couple of times with the press, and there were stories of her drug taking, and, you know, knowing what one knows now about Michael Hutchence, you can only imagine the sort of things that she was up to.
There was some decadence that went on, but no more than anyone else was doing at that period of time. But just because it was Kylie, it seemed to be more interesting to people.
Perhaps she wasn't being that naive, perhaps she kind of leaked it accidentally on purpose because it just linked in with her, you know, carefully stage-managed good girl going bad spell.
Kylie and Michael's relationship suffered under demanding tour schedules and fizzled out towards the end of 1991 after Michael was seen out with Danish supermodel Helena Christensen. Kylie was suddenly left very much on her own. Her contract with Stock Aitken and Waterman had not been renewed, and her audience had grown up and moved on. Kylie was finally free, but how would she deal with being left to her own devices?
I don't think Kylie necessarily lost her identity when she split up with Michael, but I think she was given sort of this newfound freedom to discover what her identity was.
Her image became a lot more kind of on the edge, a lot more fashionable, a lot less mainstream, and it actually wasn't a big success commercially because of all of those things.
I think working with the Manics, I think there was a moment where one of her songs didn't even get into the charts. This would have been very, very scary for someone like Kylie. She had to sacrifice one kind of audience in order to get the kind of integrity that would enable to be around for a long time.
Considering she was singing songs about kind of death and roses with, you know, relatively unknown characters like Nick Cave, she actually did quite well. So, you know, I think now we can kind of look back on that and see that the Kylie that then transpired couldn't really have happened without that deconstruction phase.
I don't look at it as reinvention. It's just a change, it's progression, it's growing older and learning about myself. I've got, you know, hopefully a long time ahead of me to keep learning about myself and what I think of the world and how I fit in.
During the 5 years she was with Deconstruction Records, Confide in Me was Kylie's only top 10 hit. And in 1996, for the first time in 8 years, she released no records. Her profile had sunk to an all-time low, and Kylie had all but killed off her pop persona. It wasn't until a meeting with Parlophone bosses in 1999 that a possible rebirth for Kylie looked set to happen.
Putting a go with Parlophone, which is an extraordinarily sophisticated pop machine, sort of elevated Kylie to the level she should be at. You know, working with very clever Imagineers, if you like, pop fantasists, rather than the slightly low level, either the grubby level or the slightly nerdy level at Deconstruction.
The reinvention of Kylie was really just a throwback to her old image, but a much raunchier one.
She knew the way to come back was by making records that were about pleasure. Her pleasure and therefore everyone else's pleasure. They were about happiness and delight. But they now had a darker shadow to them. There was something, they weren't silly and frivolous and end of the pier and High Street because she'd gone somewhere else.
What she did when she signed to Parlophone was really take advantage of her looks, and there's that famous shot of her in the gold hot pants that, you know, you can now see her in Madame Tussauds. It became iconic, and she played on her best asset, her bum, and that's, for years, was what she was famous for, was the best bum in show business.
Instrumental in reinventing Kylie was her stylist and confidant, William Baker. Baker had been responsible for putting Kylie in the gold hot pants, and his creations were inspired by iconic female images from different eras. The initially modelled Kylie on the pin-up girls of the 1940s and taught her how to pose, arching her back and contorting her body to show off her perfectly proportioned curves.
You have to give a lot of credit to William Baker, who's been Kylie's stylist on and off for the duration of her career. And what William Baker has this incredible talent of doing is tapping into trends and creating these iconic images. And one of the reasons that Kylie has been so successful is these really, really powerful images.
When you talk to William Baker, he's kind of defensive about Kylie. He gives the impression of knowing her better than most people. He always kind of hints at the hidden depths of Kylie. And I think he feels it's his job to not just be a stylist to her, but to kind of put across the various images and the sides of her personality that he's had access to that perhaps the rest of the world haven't.
William and Kylie, he calls her Minnie and she calls him Willie. So that says it all, doesn't it, really?
William Baker had discovered Kylie's best asset, and her purred derriere whipped the tabloids into a frenzy.
You cannot do an interview about Kylie without mentioning those gold hot pants spinning around. Girl or guy, you're just glued to the screen. I remember when it came out. And apparently her stylist picked them up for 50p in some thrift store.
The slogan would have been, Kylie, have you forgotten how hot she is? You know, that's what that video screamed out. It was a brilliant single. It was, you know, it wasn't quite the sort of edgy dance music she'd experimented with a few years previously. It was much more sort of brilliant, straight ahead disco music.
I worked on the Sun newspaper at the time that the gold bottom arrived, and we dedicated pages and pages of newspaper to the gold hot pants and Kylie's bottom.
There were a lot of rumours that it was Botox, you know, but you know, as I've said before, she, you know, 5'2", you know, there's not much gravity left for things to drop, and she kind of became a sex symbol, but in a good way.
It became almost an enigma on its own, and I think I'm right in saying that once a front page was dedicated to just Kylie's bottom, and that's something that not many other people can say they've achieved, and it is a fantastic bottom, you've got to say.
Coming up, Kylie walks the tightrope of fame in a bid to gain maximum exposure.
It's not as if men can actually imagine they could be engaged in a sex act with Kylie Minogue. She's there to be admired.
With minimum scandal as her love life goes out of control.
Lurid kiss and tell on Kylie Minogue is just about the greatest slice of tabloid gold.